So it's a great privilege for me to introduce our luncheon speaker, Congressman Jason Chaffetz. He's a contributor on Fox News Networks and a fellow at Harvard at the Kennedy School Institute of Politics. Jason Chaffetz was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives in 2008 and was selected by his peers to be a committee chairman, only the fifth time in 100 years that a three-term member of the House ascended to such a position. As chairman of the powerful Oversight and Government Reform Committee, he led investigations into the United States Secret Service, the Department of Education, IT vulnerabilities, the Drug Enforcement Agency, the Office of Personnel Management data breach, the Environmental Protection Agency, the Benghazi terrorist attack, misuse of classified information by Hillary Clinton, Fast and Furious, and the IRS scandal. Congressman Chaffetz left the U.S. House in June 2017. Prior to serving in Congress, he was Chief of Staff to the Governor of Utah, a former place kicker on the Brigham Young University football team. He earned his BA in Communications in 1989, after which he was part of the local business community for 16 years before entering the public sector. We're very pleased to welcome Jason Chaffetz.
Thank you. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me here. I do appreciate it. It's very kind of you to have a former member of Congress. You know, they say it was Will Rogers who actually said the opposite of progress is Congress. And so, I got to clarify the record here. I was a kicker, not a football player there once upon a time in this team out west called BYU. And at the time, you know, that was the one position, being a kicker, where if they touch you, they throw a flag. I wasn't an actual football player. I was telling some people, too, that my dad grew up in Germantown, right outside there in Philly, and went to Penn State. He was actually the manager of the Penn State football team back when Joe Paterno was an assistant, and it was a pretty great joy when my very last game that I got to play in college was against Penn State in the Holiday Bowl. This is getting to be a long time ago, and unfortunately Penn State kicked our butts. So, but it was an honor to be in that game, I tell you that. I wish I was here with my wife, Julie. She and I just celebrated our 30th wedding anniversary, and we've been very blessed to have 3 kids. We have a son and then 2 daughters. Our oldest 2 are married. And being from Utah, let me clarify, they're not married to each other, okay? So I just want you to understand that. Life brings a lot of changes along the way. You know, I think about our young son. He just graduated law school, and he's got a beautiful wife, and he's just starting out in his career in the field of law. But you know, things change along the way. I still remember when our son Max was just a little kid, and he came running around the corner, and there was this. He was holding this thing about this big. And he came around the corner and he said, Mom, look at this great big CD. Because it was a record. And he didn't know what a record was. You know, and I look at the generation now, and I think of all the different changes in the way life is going. If you haven't seen this, there is a meme out there on the internet that just makes me laugh, because it's Howard Cosell, and I'm old enough to know who Howard Cosell is. Howard Cosell, and on one side of him is Bruce Jenner, on the other side of him is O.J. Simpson, and it says, "Oh, Howard, if you only knew how the world was going to change." Yikes. Things change. They don't always change for the better, right? So, part of what I wanted to share with you here is, and I want to kind of challenge you along the way, is why do you believe what you believe? And what is it that you're going to do in order to change things the way you want them to be changed? So This is a great conference, right? It's been going on since 1989 or so, has an incredible nationwide reputation as a great conservative event to get out and share ideas and learn and share and learn more. But now what do? Okay? You believe, you're here. It's a beautiful Saturday, afternoon, and you're here in this room. But most people aren't here in this room. So that the big question is, what can you do about it? I served in Congress, and how many times do people, just in the hall, came in and asked me about this, that, and the other. But I got to tell you, I really want you to dig down deep and think about, why do I believe what I believe? And I'm for one that believes that the best way that conservatives can do what they need to do is talk more from their hearts. I don't believe that the liberal left is more compassionate, that they care more. That's usually the part of the territory they take, right? We care more than the others. And I think it's quite the opposite, actually. They believe in the perpetuation of big government and Big Brother and the nanny state that takes care of you. That you need to give up all of your resources and let them make decisions. The idea of self-determination just escapes them. The idea of liberty and life and prosperity, these are not things and themes that they would talk about in a similar type of lunch for them. And part of what you need to do, I think, is share your own story. And I thought I'd share a little bit of my story and see if that might spark a way that you can do some things to be even more compelling in what you do and how you do it. So I grew up in California. You can boo that part. That's okay. I realize you like me being here, but, it wasn't my fault, So I was born up in Northern California, lived in Southern California, lived in Arizona, lived in Colorado. We moved around a lot as a family. But I grew up in an idyllic household. I grew up in the time when you just run around until you got hungry, then you come back in. Or it got dark, or you got cold, then you come back in. There was never a day that I wondered if I would have a shelter over my head. There was never a day where I wondered if I would have food to eat. Not everybody grows up like that. Not everybody has it so good. I had two parents that loved me. They cared for me. Again, not every family has that. So I was going along. I played soccer. That's just what I did. I was a kid. I was happy-go-lucky. I loved it. But then as I got a little bit older and suddenly had 2 digits, and I was 10 and moving forward, life started to change for me. I became more aware of my surroundings and learned things. Well, by the time I was an early teenager, I was shocked one day when my parents came in and sat us down for breakfast. Now, usually my dad made breakfast and lunch, and thank goodness my mom made dinner, because Dad was terrible at his job of making us breakfast and lunch. But nevertheless, it was a little different this morning because my parents were more dressed up than normal. I had a younger brother, Alex, and the two of us sat there, and our parents told us that they were getting divorced. Now, I didn't see that coming. It's not like they were yelling, screaming, having fights. They weren't. I mean, it really did surprise us. Didn't understand it. Blamed myself. Thought it's something I had done. My parents were very good, bless their heart, to explain to us it had nothing to do with us kids. But it was a difficult time, and it was challenging, and it wasn't happy, and it was just difficult. Moving forward a few years, my parents are obviously separated at this point because they've just gone through a divorce. And my mom sat us down, and me separately from my brother Alex, just one-on-one. And then she told me that she had cancer. She had breast cancer. And as a teenager, I didn't fully understand that. I knew it was bad. I'd heard bad things about it, but I didn't understand that over the next 10 years, how difficult these things would be. Some of the highest of highs, but also some of the lowest of lows. And, she passed away at an age that is younger than I am today. And I still go through those, she passed away, I think she was 50, 51 years old. And got it when she was, or at least diagnosed it when she was in her late 30s. Far too young. I only wish that they had the kind of medicine and diagnostics and everything else that they have today, but they didn't. And, no kid should have to, nobody should go through that process of, picking up your mom and so she could sit on the toilet and then picking her back up and, getting her back to bed. That's interesting because I think through those experiences, it may be a better, stronger, more loving person. In its own kind of weird way, I wish he was still here, but I wouldn't want to trade that closeness and the bonding that I had, not only as a son, but as a friend to my mom. Later on, my father would actually contract colon cancer. And this is where I get to preach at you a little bit, because the doctor told us if he had had any sort of diagnostic test in the 8 or 10 years prior to that, it would have caught it and he'd be just fine and he'd probably still be here with us. He passed away about 6 years ago. And so, I signed up for the weekly colonoscopy, and I figure I'd already had so many enemas in Congress, I'm fine to go ahead and... So, gentlemen, get that done. Women too. My parents divorced. My mom's fighting cancer. My dad moves up to Colorado. I'm up there with him. So things are still good for us. And live in this beautiful, there's a place called Winter Park, and for those of you that are actual snow skiers, I kind of giggle when you talk about the mountains of Pennsylvania, Okay. Yeah, that's cute. So we had some real mountains out in Colorado and Utah, and we had this beautiful house, big bay, these big windows, and the snow was falling. We had snowmobiles. I mean, it was beautiful. And then one day, my dad sat us down and said that he had extended himself too far, and he had to file for bankruptcy. And I went from living with, my own room, my own bathroom, just snowmobiles, life was great, to a one-bedroom apartment where my brother and I slept in the front room on this little blow-up mattress, and sometimes we didn't even want to blow it up, so we just laid on sleeping bags right there on the couch or by the TV, and worked a couple of jobs where get the check and hand it over to Dad so we had something to eat and we could pay the rent. And here's the point of telling you all these stories, okay? Every single one of you has this story. Every single one of you. If I got you up here and we did a little interview, you have this same story. Now, it may not be fighting cancer, it may not be bankruptcy, it may be addiction, it may be a car accident, it may be financial woes, it may be, who knows what it is. There are an infinite number of things. But here's the point. If you saw me before today, you'd have no idea. Every single person is dealing with the same things. And you have no idea. None of my friends knew. I didn't share this stuff with them. It was too personal, it's just too personal. But it is amazing how you find yourself crossing paths with other people. I'm always amazed by that. I don't think it's all just coincidence. I don't think we're here because some big bang all of a sudden happened. But it gives an opportunity, I think, when you're talking about what you believe in, We're not going to be that effective if you just think you're going to get it done on Twitter or Facebook. I mean, hey, I'm there, I do it too. I give out some zinger and think, ooh, this will be fun. Watch, there'll be 600 people that like this, you know? That's not really moving the ball forward. You have to be able to share from your heart why you believe what you believe. And if you do that, and you break bread with people, and you're a true and honest friend, and you show that you care, and you explain why you believe what you believe, whether it be, minimum wage, or the national debt, or, voting rights, whatever it might be, talk from your heart, and I promise you, you will be that much more successful. I was, as a member of Congress, had the opportunity to go several times overseas, visit our troops, do things like that. I had a chance to be in Afghanistan a couple of times. I still will remember as clear as day meeting with these two Marines. And the two Marines were down south in the Kandahar region. They had taken us on a helicopter to a small village, and then I like to separate myself from the handlers, if you will, and push them aside and be able to talk one-on-one with whoever was out there, and always tried to pick somebody that didn't know I was going to be there, so it would be more spontaneous. And so I managed to pull across these two Marines and started talking to them. And then it took a few minutes to get them loosened up, so they were really talking about what they wanted to talk about. And then the Marine said, "Permission to speak freely, sir?" And I said, "Of course, that's exactly what I want you to do." Taken off their helmets, sat down, got relaxed, and I said, what are you worried about most? And this Marine, as tough as any Marine you can possibly imagine, kind of welled up with little tears in his eyes, and he said, "You know what? I can't get anybody to help my wife mow the lawn." And that's what he was worried about. He's there serving for a year plus. And I just think that as conservatives who love this country, love our flag, there is still more that we can do to reach out to those first responders, police officers, EMT, people that work in the hospital, in the emergency rooms. I'm always in awe of them. And certainly there are people in the National Guard and the people that serve in our United States military. Because you know what? When you reach out and do it with a sincere heart, everybody knows that you're doing it for all the right reasons. That gives you an opportunity to go out and actually say, this is why I believe. This is why I believe in this person. This is why this election, I think, is so important. I also think that just being involved and showing up is so much of the process. So I was 16 years in the local business community. I did not plan to run for political office. But in Utah, the wealthiest family was the Huntsman family. Now Huntsman Sr. did something smart. He acquired a company. He was in like the egg crate business. And they acquired a little company, and they happened to have a new technology. It was called styrofoam. Pretty good move to acquire styrofoam, because nobody knew what it was, and that made them this multi-billion-dollar, family. And so John Huntsman Jr. was going to run for governor in 2003. Well, back in 1995, that's when they made this announcement that they were going to pour hundreds of millions of dollars in to fight cancer. Well, if they're going to spend all that money fighting the disease that killed my mother, at least I could put up a few yard signs. That's the way I approached it. So through a mutual friend, I asked, hey, can we get a little meeting with the Huntsmans, and just, if nothing else, we say thank you, and maybe we could put up some yard signs. So Julie and I, my wife and I, go up there, and 10 minutes turns into 30 minutes, turns into, hey, why don't you come back next week? And then on October 31st, I remember it because it was Halloween, 2003, I was offered the job to be a communications person for John Huntsman Jr.'s congressional or his gubernatorial run. Well, this is about a 75% pay cut from what I was used to making, and thought about it, prayed about it, decided, you know what, let's just kind of jump off the deep end here and see what happens. And a few months later, in January, we were driving down I-15, those of you familiar in Utah, headed towards Fillmore, little town, and John turns to me and says, "Hey, congratulations, you're going to be the new campaign manager." And I said, whoa, time out, wait a sec. I have never done this before. And he said, don't worry about it, I've never run for governor before, you know. Okay. Well, he wins. Crowded field, incumbent Republican, ran against another Republican, and he became the 16th governor of Utah, and then we had a similar discussion, and John said, "Hey, congratulations, you're going to be my chief of staff." And I said, whoa, wait a sec. There's 22,000 employees, $14 billion budget, and I have never done this. And he said, "I've never been governor before. Don't worry about it. We'll figure it out." If you read that book, Good to Great, it was sort of that approach. Get good people on the bus, and you'll figure it out, you know? And I think that makes a lot of sense. So next thing I know, I find myself as chief of staff. Well, chief of staff to the governor, you get to interact with your congressional delegation. In Utah, we're a much smaller state, right? We have 2 senators, and then at the time, we only had 3 members in the House of Representatives. It didn't take long for me to recognize that there was a slow gazelle in that herd. And I can tell about a third of you have not watched the Discovery Channel and understand that lions go and take out the slow gazelle, right? So I decide, hey, look, I think I'm going to run for Congress because I think I can do it better than this person can do it. And I took an extra 2 years and I studied that record. And I understood what he voted for, how he voted, what he did. And this is another Republican. And I tell you, he's a nice, decent human being. Nothing personal, but I just felt like we were ready for a change, and so I started to do that. Now, when you by yourself and your wife decide, okay, you're gonna run for Congress, then the question is what? So when you have a name like Chaffetz, guess what? When you go to get Chaffetz.com, it's available. There is nobody that thought, oh, I better get that name. Then I thought, what am I going to do? You know, Chaffetz, they can't even pronounce it, let alone spell it. So I came up with Jason in the House, which still works. I still use that today. I thought everybody can spell that. They can pronounce it. So, but then I had to go find people. And I sat down with Jennifer Scott. And I sat with Jennifer and I said, Jennifer, I'd never met her before, but I'd heard about her. And I went and sat with her and told her what I was thinking of doing. And I'm sure I talked way too long in explaining what we were trying to do. And she said, yeah, I think I will. I think I'll come join you. One at a time. 1 became 2, 2 became 4, 4 became 8. And we slowly went through this process. I took 2 years to do it. And I would go and I would talk to people. And first and foremost, I listened to people. And number 2, I kind of developed these principles that I thought were important. Adhere to the Constitution? Absolutely. But fiscal discipline, limited government, accountability, and a strong national defense. And so when anybody asked me about a specific policy point, I would go back to the principle and say, this is what's most important. So let's take this policy and apply it to the principle. And when you put this formula, principle over policy, then you can get to the right conclusion. Now, some things are gray in the gray area. Some things can swing both ways. But my guess is if you think things through like that, and you can get somebody else who you're trying to persuade into a position where you agree on the principle, do you believe in self-determination, or do you just want to cede your rights over to some faceless bureaucrat, and you can get them nodding their head? This is where I think there can be a lot of inroads. For instance, the younger generation is they're almost libertarian in their mindset. This is where you see people having, I think, good success because they start to understand about, no, Do you want to let mom and dad continue to make rules for all you and your life and everything you do and tell you whether or not you have to wear a mask or anything? I mean, do you smart enough to actually make that decision yourself? Oh, I want to decide. Okay, well then you actually are going more as a conservative, maybe even a libertarian, but more conservative. Anyway, that worked. And to the point where we were running a congressional race, I was polling, I am not kidding you, this is March of 2008. Okay, they wouldn't allow me to be in the radio debate for the Republican nomination because I was polling at 2.7%, plus or minus 4.5%. I was statistically zero, okay? I'm getting those numbers slightly wrong, but my polling number was less than the margin of error, which put me at zero. They wouldn't allow me to participate in the debate. And yet, when it came time to go to the state convention, and then when I won there, and then I ran, they predicted that I was going to lose by 4% in the primary, and I won by 20 percentage points. It's because we had an army of people. Thank you. We had an army of people in one kind of generous 4-day weekend. We put up 95,000 door knockers in 4 days, just through volunteers. So it can be done, and it has to be done in a place like Pennsylvania. I mean, look, in Utah, we brag because we're the one state where Bill Clinton came in third, okay? So we're pretty conservative out west, okay? These races, it's amazing how many come down to 1 or 2 votes in a precinct. In the first election that Donald Trump won, in Michigan, he won that state by something like 10,000 votes, or 10 or 20,000 votes, can't remember what it is. Anyway, if you break it down by precinct, it was less than 2 votes per precinct. So when you ask yourself, what can I do? Take care first and foremost of your precinct. The number of people that you can get out to actually participate and vote is so critical there. Anyway, I went on, did that, went to Congress. I'm not going to tell you all those congressional stories. Someday, maybe you get invited back, and I'll tell you stories about Benghazi and how crazy that was. And anyway, that's for another week. We need another 3 hours to get through that one. Let me kind of share just a couple quick thoughts here as we wrap up here. It's been a tremendous honor and privilege to serve in the Congress. I don't want to diminish that in any way, shape, or form. What happens there, how things happen, it's so important. And I totally, fundamentally, top to bottom disagree with Harry Reid, well, pretty much on everything. But I disagree with Harry Reid when he had said, as the Senate Majority Leader, when the Democrats had the Senate, he said, you know what, nobody will ever lose an election based on process. And I think Washington, D.C. banks on the ignorance and the non-consequence, if you will, of being able to bypass regular order and just do things through not only executive fiat through the White House, but to do things in the Congress that nobody will pay attention to. For instance, the 1974 Budget Act was supposed to revise how we have done budgeting in this country. Well, if you care like I do about a $30 trillion national debt, you got to ask yourself, how did that 1974 Budget Act work? Because those are still the rules by which we operate. Only one time since 1974 have they actually gone through the regular, normal process. Instead, it's always a continuing resolution or, an omnibus. And there'll be a $2 trillion vote, yes or no. And it's just like, you got to be kidding me, because that is not the way anybody would have envisioned doing things in a proper and regular order. It's not the sexiest thing. But it is one of the most important things. If you don't have the right process, guess what? Garbage in, garbage out. You are going to end up doing what our country has done for the last 10 years. 10 years ago, our federal budget was $3.7 trillion. And by the way, how much is $1 trillion? If you spend $1 million a day every day, it'd take you almost 3,000 years to get to 1 trillion. Okay? So at the time, 10 years ago, the debt was approaching 16 trillion. Now it's approaching 30 trillion. So in a 10-year period, the budget is 50% bigger, and the debt has just about doubled. And I'm tired of all these, and on both sides of the aisle, by the way, stepping forward and saying, oh, this infrastructure bill, it's paid for. Are you kidding me? There is nothing in Washington, D.C. that is actually paid for. So the solution to that is not raising taxes. Under Donald Trump, when they cut taxes, guess what happened? The economy was spurned forward, and the revenue to the Treasury went up, all-time record high revenue to the Treasury. So when you have record high revenue and you think you're going to raise taxes, it's just not going to work. You think about it right now, going into what Joe Biden has proposed. 1 out of every $4, 25% of our gross domestic product, will be spent by the federal government. That doesn't even include the state government, local government, all these other governments. 1 out of $4. It really is scary where we're going. The number one thing I can leave you with in terms of public policy is you have to starve the beast. If you don't starve the beast, guess what? The beast will grow. That's exactly what is happening in Washington, D.C. So, how do you convey this? How do you share this? Why is it important? I went to go speak at a lot of high schools. I spoke at this high school, and this young woman, she asked me, I think, great question. She stood up and she said, well, why does it matter? Like, why does it matter? And that's the facade that the national media and a lot of people in D.C., oh, it doesn't, it's just funny money, don't worry about it, we'll just keep printing more. One of the cruelest things you can do to people, though, is have inflation. People on a fixed income, people on limited incomes, inflation hurts them more than anybody. Anyway, I could go on and on about public policy, but I think there's probably one area that I want to kind of conclude on that's as important as anything. Because when we talk about those 4 principles, right? Fiscal discipline, limited government accountability, strong national defense, right there near the top of that list is making sure that we take care of the men and women who are serving and taking care of us. Now, for those of you that have served in the National Guard, or have served in our armed services, could you please stand so we can say thank you for your, thank you. Wow. Thank you. Cannot thank you enough for your service. My dad, who I told you about, he served in the United States Air Force for a short period of time. My father-in-law served in the Army, went to Vietnam as a medic, and the service and sacrifice that so many have given to make our country free and to protect us, just unparalleled. I love telling this particular story as I wrap up here. It really touches my heart as much as anything. And I tell this to you because, again, going back to my original premise, why do we believe what we believe? And how are we going to share this and talk from our heart? And I want you to be able to have your own story and tell your own stories. And you can't just lead with, hey, my mom passed away from cancer. You can't do that. Shouldn't do that. But at the right time and the right moment, you can tell these personal stories that, in a way, I think can be compelling and allow you to share other thoughts and perspectives. When I was in Congress, I had an opportunity to go to Walter Reed Medical Center. And when I was at Walter Reed, I brought, like, I don't know, 6 or 7 other members of Congress, bipartisan. And there was a room, it was probably twice the size of this room, brightly lit, upbeat music, you know, the kind of thing where you look at all the federal expenditures and you say, all right, this is a good use of funds. Because you had the best doctors, you had this psychologists, physical therapists. Everybody that was in this room, in this particular place, was somebody who had lost a limb serving in the United States military. Now, women lose limbs too, but this particular day that we went, there were approximately 40 men that were in here. And we kind of showed up, and it was not a setup, it just happened. It came in a side door, and the first Marine that we saw was a young man. He was from New York, and he was in a wheelchair. And it was just a couple weeks ago that he had been on the battlefield and gotten hit. And he had lost both his legs. And we wanted to shake his hand and thank him for his service. And I thought I was emotionally prepared. I knew that it was going to be hard to go in here and say hello and meet these people, but I was not prepared for how difficult it really was. And I wish every high school student would do this. I think it would change their perspective on what's really important and what service is really about. But saw him, wanted to shake his hand. That's what I was thinking in my mind I was going to do with all these people. But he had lost both legs, and he had lost his left hand, or his left arm, and he had lost his right arm. And I just hit me like a ton of bricks. And I just had tears, and we all did, streaming down our face. I didn't know what to do. You know, he was heavily medicated, that's for sure, and tried to awkwardly lean down and give him a hug and say thank you for your service. It's kind of the least I could possibly do. Well, we went around that room, and we're thanking each of these people for their service. And they were so nice and grateful. And you could tell different people were in different stages of acceptance. And some were really just not doing well. Until I got to this one man. And he's kind of changed my life in the better way. You meet and touch people's lives. Like I said, you cross paths with people, and some people just change your life. And this guy, his name was Carlos. Carlos had served his 4th tour of duty when he was hit by an improvised explosive device. Carlos lost both legs. He lost his right hand, and his left hand wasn't exactly the way it was originally configured. But Carlos was like the happiest person I'd ever seen. He was beaming from ear to ear. He was all smiles, all happy, all the time. And I really gravitated towards him, and I sat there with him for a long period of time and just started talking about him. He talked about his love of country. He talked about the love of his people in the military unit, which he was serving. He talked about his love of God, and he talked about his wife, and he talked about his 2 daughters and how much he loved them. And he had a support structure around him that was buoying him up. He talked about the power of prayer. He talked about things that were so many. He kind of checked all the positive things that were going on in his life. And despite all the trauma and the physical disfiguration that he had taken, he couldn't wait to get fixed so he could go back to service for 5th tour. And you know, I just inspired by ordinary Americans who do extraordinary things. People who run to the sound of the siren. Every day there's some story about a policeman who's, you know, running in to save a kid out of a car. Gunshots, and they're driving to it. But people that you never hear their stories, that are just trying to lead a good, decent, honest life, helping their family, helping their loved one, helping a teenager go through the temptations that teenagers deal with. I guess what I loved as much as anything about Carlos, and this is the lesson I want to share with all of you, that I want you to perpetuate and share with others. I just loved what Carlos's shirt said. Carlos was wearing a shirt and it said, "Wounded Combat Marine, some assembly required." We got problems, we got challenges, but you know what? This is still the greatest country on the face of the planet, bar none. So I'm honored that you would invite me here and that you'd be so involved and engaged. And I hope what you take, or the core of what you take here over these 2 days, that it just doesn't get forgotten and we just say, hey, you know, it's getting to be November, maybe we should. It's a constant battle, something that baton needs to be passed to the next generation. It needs to be shared. And if you do so from your heart, and don't think that it's just going to happen on some tweet or Facebook post or something like that, then I think that we as a nation and we as conservatives will be that much more successful. May God bless you, and may God bless the United States of America. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Congressman Chaffetz, for that wonderful message. And special thanks to Jason, who has worked with us as we have coped with the pandemic and scheduling and rescheduling. And so anyway, it is a very happy day to finally all be here together and to hear the Congressman speak.